Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Modern Fairy Sightings Podcast. My name is Jo Hickey Hall, and today I have a wonderful guest, Andreas Kornevall, author, storyteller, and ecologist. And also, I'm going to say rune magician, because we were just discussing this a short while ago, and your book Waking the Dragons, Norse Myth, Runes and Magic is absolutely brilliant. I'm reading this at the moment, but the reason that I found you was through a discussion between Patrick Harpur and Bernardo Kastrup, which was on the Adventures in Awareness podcast. And of course, they were talking about your work within that show. So welcome, Andreas, to Modern Fairy Sightings.
That's really exciting. I love Patrick Harpur's work. I have his book right here, The Philosopher's Secret Fire.
Yeah. Yes.
He's a great thinker.
He really is.
He needs to be better known, Patrick. He's got so many fantastic ideas. So yeah.
It is strange how his work isn't. I mean, I guess it hasn't sort of maybe hit mainstream awareness, but certainly for anybody that's interested in Otherworld, I mean, his demonic reality is an absolute classic for anybody interested in these areas, and his book on the imagination and also in philosophy. Yeah, what a guy, and great work there. So yeah, it's really, I'm so delighted to be able to chat to you, because what they were talking about in that conversation resonated with me so deeply. They were talking about the way that about spirit and soul and its relationship with the dragon. And so I would really love it if you could describe that kind of function.
Yes, it's an alchemical function, which positions the spirit and the soul as two distinct forces in a way. This is something that you read about also with James Hillman, who is a great psychologist. If anyone listening, he's almost a continuation of Jungian ideas, an evolving of Jungian ideas, and many other things. But what he often insisted upon in his work was that the soul often went down. It was a underworld. A soul experience was an underworld experience. It was the experience when you have a divorce, or when you go through an illness, or when something happens that forges your soul wisdom. The qualities of soul wisdom comes from these suffering moments in our lives. Any blues player would know that. Standing in the street corner, it's full of soul, right? And whereas spirit, he positions as more of the ascending force, something which is bewinged, and you can associate that with meeting of the beloved, or meeting with the fragrances of the rose garden, or the beauties of things, the ecstatic divine experiences that we have sometimes in our lives when we feel great, when life is good. So in life, those two forces are inside of us, and in nature we see that the soul is often in the domain of the serpent. We get that obviously in many mythologies, that the serpent knows the chthonic. It knows the underworld. It knows the passages through the dark tunnels. It sheds its skin there. It smells with its tongue. It's got all sorts of fantastic mechanisms and wildness in it that can never be tamed, right? But it's always a knowledge of the underworld, and the serpent is what we always avoid. It's what we are afraid of, and rightly so. We no one wants to go through the underworld experience willingly. Now, the other then, so the serpent is obviously often in the domain of the underworld and the soul. Again, you can add more associations there with the feminine. You can add other kind of qualities to that, and then you have the the ascending, and in the animal, what we see with spirit is there are associations there with the eagle, which is this flight into the sun, and this incredible quality of flying. In the Zen tradition, you call it the big mind, or in Asia, this is the ecstatic mind. In Sweden, you say that the wind, the ond, which is the ecstatic powers that you can receive, and that is an ascending, a spirit. And the eagle and the serpent in the wild are always at each other. So inside of us, there is this constant struggle between our shadow, our underworld experiences, our soul, and our spirit. And you see that when we project onto others. You see it when we disagree with each other. We are casting the shadow on someone else, and we see that in conflicts and all of these things. So psychologists and alchemists from the very beginning, when they have this idea that they merge in themselves the shadow with the light, and that's in effect a psychological integration. And what's beautiful here is that the serpent and the eagle in the myths, when they merge as one body, the being that comes out of that is a being that's able to have wings but also scales. It's a being that knows the dark as well as the heavens, the hells and the heavens. And that's the birth then of the wisdom of the dragon, which is this alchemical force that brings out the soul and the spirit into one body, the dragon body. So it's a deeply, and embodies a quality of wisdom.
It really makes sense. Thank you very much for that. It really kind of appeals to us at this time, I feel, because we have this situation of this kind of these polarizations, both in society and then within ourselves as well. I've been talking to people a lot lately about the encounters that they have with either Gwynap Neath or the dark man, all these kind of darker forces that appear. We tend to think of fairy experiences as being all sort of light and airy and fluffy, and of course they're not like that at all. But even the ones that are pleasant and enlightening, sometimes there's a kind of darker agent within those encounters that take us somewhere, and this is something that in our society, in our culture, we've been told to steer clear of. Because it's evil. Because the unknown is evil, it's unsafe, anything dark, no, just look away, just look to the light. And as you kind of pointed out there too, in any kind of spiritual tradition, certainly I lived through the 90s and the kind of the New Age tradition, and it was always looking towards expanding your spirituality, always looking towards the light, looking towards the good. And if anything was kind of a bit pokier or darker, we were told to sort of steer clear of it. But this is the mistake, isn't it, that we've made effectively. How do you think that we can rediscover? Because even now, as I'm speaking to these people, there are some folks that will automatically just want to put a bit of distance between themselves and these darker encounters. How do you think we can manage that?
Such a profound question, and I think first of all the ramifications and the consequences of a meeting with one's fear, going into the difficult parts of a spiritual meeting, which is not what we expected, which is potentially predatorial or all of these things. To me, there are often different facets to this. The one thing that we can use looking at society is that when we hide something, So when we hide our alcoholicism, when we hide our binge drinking or our binge watching and all of these things, when we put that in the cellar, there's no negotiation available then. So once it's hidden, the negotiation with these forces, whether it's jealousy or whether it's spirits and all of those things, they become often then hidden and not discussed anymore. So you can't, so let's say for an alcoholic, if they say, look, I like to drink, and he puts the bottle of whiskey in front of his family, in front of himself, then you can have a conversation, then you can have a negotiation. I find that with difficult experiences as well. I'm not saying that it's easy, but I think when you bring it, when you are brought face to face with something difficult, you need to find out how you can negotiate with this thing, what it is that it requires, and what you can do in order to have some kind of harnessing power with it. So fear is the biggie here, and fear then needs to be negotiated. And what does that mean? It needs to transform into trust. And I work with a lot of people in my rune practice where we use runes to find out how we can transform this experience into trust, which then can lead to the next steps. And trust can mean many things. It can be that you trust yourself being in the presence of something which is predatorial, which means standing your ground. And often that in magical practice is essential. But it's something that I sense it requires also not a solitary engagement. You need to be able to have a conversation around with other people. You need to be supported if something of that nature comes into your life. There are many cultures who work with it differently, but in other cases, you find that for example, in Tibetan Buddhism, what's wonderful there is that the spirits come into the areas of karma. So they can be negotiated by saying, well, would you like to have a better karma in your next phase of your lives? Maybe you shouldn't come here and become predatorial. So you negotiate on that level, and I thought that was fantastic. But it's a consequence that I think darkens when we brush it away and hide it in the cellar, rather than bring it up and find ways to have this conversation with it.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. And when you're saying that we need trust, effectively that kind of starts with truth, doesn't it? Because if we've got to kind of trust the situation, trust ourselves, we've got to be honest. We've got to be honest about it, and that requires truth.
Exactly. And truth is an old, fantastic word. I love the word truth. It comes from the Old English word called trow. And trow is the same word as tree. So the tree and the truth are actually joined in the old Godhead. So in Odin, for example, tree and truth are both the same. And I can't think of anything better than, if you are going through difficult journeys, than to learn from the tree. And standing next to a tree, it embodies that quality of wisdom that we often see. It's got its roots in the dark, chthonic worlds. It grows towards the light. It isn't balanced. So it speaks to us of a truth and of a trust and of a stillness. And then, of course, there's many other areas into all of this. I mean, for those people who have experienced very fearful spiritual experiences, which I sometimes come across, then you also have to recognize the mind in this, and find out how much is kind of in the mind, how much is in the unconscious working out, and how much is a spiritual expression. Both are equally valid. In Scandinavian folklore, one thing that often comes up again and again is that we are multi-souled in our bodies. We have many souls, many different selves. And there's one particular self which is revealed when we are doing ceremony. It's revealed when we are meditating. So if you meditate for more than 30 minutes, usually the dreaming self is called a ward. That tends to become more active. And it's more within the dreaming realm that it's active. It's not so confined by the body. Whereas the waking self, which we are in now, that ward is much more attached to the physical body. And often when we experience things of spiritual nature, it's through that second ward, which is the dreaming ward, when our bodies are still, when we have a moment of reverie, and that ward travels often into then visionary experiences and capacities.
Yes.
Now, people sometimes don't distinguish the two. So a bit like when you're falling asleep, it's your second soul, the dreaming soul, that then takes over.
Yeah.
And it's sometimes difficult to distinguish it. But I would say that it is that ward that has the eyes to see the spirits and the dreaming, and that is the one that we need to exercise when we're negotiating with something like spirit encounters and things like this. Not so much the waking ward.
No. I wonder if that is one route in which we can tackle, and I don't know what you think of this, but well, you're in England too. You're in Sussex, aren't you?
Yeah.
What's happening in England at the moment, which is really shocking. And I know you spoke a little bit before to the idea that things need to be seen, and at the moment, I feel like we're moving to better times. I feel in my heart that we're moving somewhere where this kind of old world is falling, and that what we are seeing right now is a crumbling of that old world. And so all the really difficult stuff, we can't do that. We can't achieve this sense of balance, as you say, this truth, this wisdom, until we have dealt with the really, really horrible, horrible stuff that we don't want to look at. And we're seeing it. I mean, it's spilling out onto the streets, right? So how would you feel we can tackle that? I mean, if people have started to introduce meditation into schools, which is fantastic. It's really fantastic to be able to provide that skill to our young people. What do you think about kind of what's happening at the moment, and how something could be aided practically in these times?
Yeah. I mean, when we look at history, you have to gasp. You really it's a frightening sight, and I get more and more. To me, what confirms to me when we see history is that we are not willing to carry the weight of the darkness, the racism, the horrors in ourselves. We are never the racist. We are never the colonialist. We are. Everyone is working thinkingly. They're working as the good person, and this is the first mistake, I think. So, I think we need to confront in ourselves this trouble, and I'm more and more convinced that there needs to be an open encouragement for people to receive a form of therapy, whether it's educational, whether it's in the schools, like you say, in meditation, but a form of understanding that in themselves there is the totality, there is the troubles of the world, and we need to because if the moment we point the finger at my neighbor, I have committed I have created the First World War, or the second, the Second World War. I have participated in that conflict. I am just reenacting it. So the thing to do, and the difficulty, I mean, goodness me, that's hard, is to actually recognize that there is there are these horrors in us, and we need to negotiate with them within, and we need to have guidance of how we can ourselves overcome them. And that's something that equally exists on both left and right, this kind of trouble. And you see it equally on the left and equally on the right. It's just this constant conflict and battles. And it's not going to lead to anywhere good unless we say, well, I'm going to have to go and work on myself. And once people have done that, they realize then that it is not, the trouble isn't the other person. The trouble isn't the other. The trouble is something that I have to negotiate within myself.
This is it. And I think a lot of it seems to be to do with the fact that in our communities and our cultures, we've lost the idea of myths. We very rarely, I mean, thankfully, there is more storytelling, and people like yourselves are doing a great job in the world, but not everybody has access to that at the moment. And so whereas we would in history, gather around and hear the stories and hear whatever traditional myths existed in our local cultures, that is missing. And that, people are hearing stories, but they're hearing them in kind of echo chambers, online, and these are, they're not held. They're just, it's troublesome, and they don't actually hold any kind of roots in the very important myths that we need to have around us. So yeah, I'm not sure kind of on how, on a practical note, we can actually navigate these times, but it feels certainly important to step back from participating in the division and adding to that.
That's right. One thing that I'm quite obsessed about, and I have been for a couple of years now, are reconciliation ceremonies, and what they can look like today. Because in the central myth, the northern myth, there is a great war, and a terrible war that happens between the gods of the sky and the gods of nature, and there can be no winner, and they have to find a way to reconcile their othernesses, and they in order for life to become regenerative again, for life to live, for flowers to grow, for things to happen, the conflict has to end. The tree of life was burning. There was all the stakes that we see in the world now, because obviously myths never were, they always are. That great quote from some Roman philosopher, I forgot his name now, Salatius or something. Anyway, we find that in the myths you see reconciliation ceremonies between god families in the northern myths. And one of the major and one of the things that happens there is that once they have reconciled, again, I've said this, but a wisdom is born. And that wisdom exists in the god worlds. It exists in the realms of the gods. But it is often said that the wisdom has not yet come to our world. So the sky gods and nature spirits, the colonizers and all of this is continuously rummaging through our world, but we have not yet found the appropriate reconciliation ceremonies to activate this wisdom. We don't know what they look like. The only, I would say, one of them that I have seen and felt keenly was that what they did in South Africa.
Right.
It was this truth and reconciliation plan. So when Nelson Mandela was freed, instead of then slaying all the white people in government, which is kind of probably what the intuition was telling them. Let's gun them down, and let's have a bloody revolution. Instead, they brought the people, the white people, to a court where they will speak their truth of what they have done to the black population, and they broke down. they broke down in tears. They recognized to themselves that it was absolutely horrific what they did. And that truth and reconciliation, instead of then throwing them into prison, they were set free. And that reconciled South Africa for some time. It was a powerful, powerful thing. And these are the time, and that was led by Desmond Tutu.
Yes, Bishop Desmond Tutu.
Glory
Yeah.
to his soul, right? The great saint of our time. And he was someone who had led that. And I feel we need Desmond Tutu's spirit back. We need to figure out what reconciliation rituals can look like in our modern age now, and what kind of choreography they would have, and I have a feeling grief would stand in center of those ceremonies, and the truth speaking, like you mentioned, to speak the truth and to allow grief to be in the room whilst it happens. I think then we can find a way out from conflict. But it's looking at the Middle East, something like that feels almost impossible. But it is the great weight, so I am reconciliation rituals. I feel is something that we need to really try and work with.
Yeah, thank you. That's very well said. And I think even in this great weight, as you refer to, perhaps there's something we can do in our own families, because even in our own families, there's going to be division. There's people that have one opinion and other opinions, one belief and other beliefs. And so we can kind of see it on the micro as well, that there are ways in which we can perhaps create ceremony and ritual in order to tackle that. And that's just in some small way going to, hopefully, I would feel, kind of ripple out.
Sometimes we call it the highest form of spirituality. It's if you can stand up at your family table,
right,
especially with the family that have that don't necessarily have the same views as you, and you can stand there and raise a toast and praise them.
Yes,
praise them for their struggles and their lives, because they all want to be happy. They don't want to suffer, right? And if you are capable of that, it's probably the hardest thing you'd ever do. But for those who can do that, it's as if an entire ancestral lineage can suddenly get blown open and cleared just from that move. I hear echoes of that when I see the old traditions of the mead hall.
Right.
You mentioned the Sutton Hoo treasure. There was a great king who I've forgotten his name now, but he reconciled the pagan and the Christians in his temple. There was a pagan shrine and a Christian shrine in his church, and he was so beloved. He was so loved by his people that they say that it was his Sutton Hoo was his gift, his offering for his burial.
Oh wow! Yeah.
And he had this enormous reconciling force, and it is a force that you don't find it's a very rare thing. Leaders don't necessarily carry that so naturally. It's something that I find unusual to see, but we've seen it in South Africa. We've seen it being born there, and I think we can study that and maybe grow from that and see how else it can be applied to the other parts of the world, and also within families. The feasting table, the sitting down for dinner, is an old ceremony, is in fact a very deep reconciliation ceremony. Just saying cheers is a form of reconciliation. Yes. But we are not aware of it so much when we do it now. But we can bring ourselves into the intention that we are sitting down, and for this moment that we're together, we are going to reconcile in the sense of just being in the glow of family, being in the glow of life, yes, rather than opinions.
That's very helpful. And we can, do that knowingly with our heart open and give the cheers and have it mean something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Even better if you brew the mead, or it doesn't have to be alcohol, but if you brew the drink precisely for the purpose that when you say cheers, it is then part of a unification of the family. And when you drink that, that becomes a medicine for the body as well as the mind, that you are participating in something that is unifying and serving the good heart.
That is beautiful. And if people can't actually make mead, they could always even just make a hot chocolate or something like that.
Cinnamon is great. I love that.
Yeah.
Yes, cinnamon can be, and that could be a drink that becomes empowered over the years. So the old meads and old wine was often like that. They, as the wine grew older, the potency of the wine in a ceremony would then get more and more profound.
Yeah, love it. And I'm also thinking about Northern Ireland when we were sort of talking about South Africa and the work that Jeremy Corbyn did, in fact, in trying to bring two sides together.
We need more of this, and we need more. I think we need more symbols around reconciliation also as well. The tree, I think, is a very great one. And we usually gathered around trees to make truths and peace agreements. So that tree in Scandinavia was also called the Warden Tree, which was a tree that was filled with memory of the ancestors.
Yes.
So when you gathered under that tree and you made a peaceful resolution towards a conflict, you were feeding the very tree of life. You were feeding the roots of life. So the peaceful resolution becomes a libation to the gods.
Yeah, so true. I mean, in our community of modern fairy sightings, we leave offerings for otherworldly beings. And I mean, I wondered how you kind of approach our connection with these otherworldly beings. This is the Modern Fairy Sightings podcast. I feel like I'd like to ask you about your kind of relationship with not only nature, because you are very close to nature. For many of us, we feel that these beings are very much tied into the environment and landscape, and not always, because they are sometimes in homes as well, and so they're to do with us too.
The troublesome in the home, yes.
Some of them, yes. Yeah, we do hear about those more. But what's your sense of kind of otherworldly encounters? As I have you here, I need to ask you.
I know you do, of course. I'm getting slight shivers as you're asking me these questions. So I feel like the presence. So I'm a great fan of the tomte. I'm a great fan. I have a spirit house for the tomte, which is the Swedish household god, house god. So he requires porridge in winter solstice. He also is quite keen on the water of life, which is aquavit during the midsummer. And I try and keep it fairly clean. I've got this house for him under a yew tree in the garden.
Oh, lovely.
And so there is a rapport and a kinship there and a conversation there. Now, the tomte is also a personalization of ancestry. So he's got memory. They live for about 2,000 years, sometimes more. So he knows the area. He knows what's been going on here. He's the anima loci. He's a local spirit. Yeah. And he's often seen in the guise often of a snake. It can happen. It can be other guises too. But if you anger the tomte, he can grow up to become as tall as a telephone pole. Really, he's and he needs he often needs a relational activity, and that's in the form of gift giving. And for some reason, it's been passed down that it's often porridge and things like that he requires. So the tomte often lived under the Warden Tree. I mentioned the Ward Tree in Scandinavia, and the tomte is someone that resides, probably has his house under a Warden Tree. That's why I put him under the yew tree, which is quite suitable. So
over here we tend to give well, I mean, you're in Sussex yourself, but in kind of my tradition, my family's Irish, we give butter and milk and honey and those kinds of gifts.
Very similar.
And
he loves butter on his, which I always thought was peculiar, but he likes to have butter on the porridge, and that's what I've been told to put, and lots of honey. Yeah,
lots of
so
honey,
it's yeah,
sustenance,
sustenance, especially
the
in the winter
porridge.
solstice.
Yeah, I
We
mean,
do it
and
with cognac. You know, the cognac in the mince pie.
oh yeah,
It's very much. I don't know if you know. Well, the Christmas scene is quite interesting because you got the tree of life with all the worlds hanging off it. You got the gifts that it brings. You know, the Christmas tree, and then you've got this red-capped character, Santa Claus,
yes,
which clearly has tendrils back into deep history, and then we give him cognac and mince pies. So often when I do that, I feel like. I'm the Tomte is aware of, or the Tomte is in effect very much the Santa Claus character. There's many other beings in which you stand in relationship with. So when you sing the rune row, for example, or when you work with runes, or when you work with myths, you often position yourself in the midst of the creation, and that includes dwarves. Gnomes or tomtar, which is they shouldn't really be categorized. They don't like that so much, but they are called often the hidden folk or the
yes,
huldru folk, and then you have giants too, and the landwaits, landvettir. So when you stand in relation to all that, many of them will then require certain types of libations in order to have a negotiation or a conversation. It tends to be that the landwaits, the nature spirits, they're not particularly happy, I would say, at this time, you know, for all the damage that we've done. Yes. So I'm always, I'm quite respectful and wary of the land spirits as such, because there's been so much destruction. And to make something, to retrieve, you can say, in shamanism, they call it soul retrieval, or to have a kind of a retrieval into that spirits, benevolent spirits and the spirits of abundance come into your life. Acts of beauty or acts of restoration. This could be reconciliation, by the way. It can be that, you know, all of those things. That's really the libations that I am working with at the moment, to find out what acts of beauty can we make, what woodlands can we plant in order for the nature spirits to get a look in again, you know, in order for us to even begin a thread of relationship, because it feels very thin at the moment.
It's very true. In our local area, we had some land that was under threat. Somebody had bought up some wasteland, and the area around here needed that wasteland for the water to soak through, and that they were about to build on it. So, you know, community came together, and so far we've been able to protect it. But I think that even acts like this, where, you know, you work together with ritual in some way, a few of us you know, gathered together and held ceremonies in honor of this land, and you know, I feel that helped in protecting it. But even these sorts of small acts can very much add up. And you mentioned, and I won't keep you too much longer because I know you're heading off today, but you did mention ancestors just there, and I have found, speaking to people and through my own work as well, that the ancestors very much tie into these otherworldly beings, our relationship with them, with the land too. It all is interlinked, and I feel at this time the ancestors are very much calling us. And I wonder if you could talk to that a little.
I'm doing that tomorrow. We're doing a practice tomorrow, particularly exactly like this. Is called the Uita Practice, where you sit from sundown to sunrise, and you sit on the land and you just tune your ear. You really just listen, and you may chant certain things, you may do certain practices, but that's really to awaken the memory of the landscape, the ancestral memory, and then to have a conversation within that landscape memory, and find out what's needed for the local spirits at this time. So we're doing it. We're setting off tomorrow, and it's a small band of us that are settling in, and that's often with the idea of increasing your visionary capacity. Our visionary capacity has been taken into the screen. You see, so the idea of watching television, the idea of what I have a feeling, even I've read this with Patrick as well. I think it was him who describes often that the fairy world for us now are the TV series, and they're still small, right? The film, we're still watching this little screen.
Yeah.
But our visionary capacity, which is in our interior, which is our inner images and our inner landscapes that we carry inside, that sometimes is not developed enough. So to develop that visionary capacity, the Uita, which is to sit out in nature, on a mound or in the woodlands, is effectively a way in which we can turn on that TV inside and see into the different worlds that exist, the different spirit worlds. And we often do that then with that second ward that I mentioned, the soul in us that's activated when we are still.
Yes.
So when we are sitting quietly, when we are in quiet surroundings, then that soul has the capacity to look through the veil, or to see through that trembling veil into the other worlds, and that requires a practice. And I've led those sessions. I'm leading one
tomorrow,
which is that's why I'm running off to buy all the breakfasts and all of that.
Right.
And so they're setting off from 8 in the evening, and they'll be keeping awake till 5:30 in the morning. So send them your prayers. It's not just a 30-minute meditation.
Yeah.
It's the whole night. But that really, afterwards, it really awakes suddenly this, wow, I didn't know I had so much visionary capacity and so many. And then from that, you can then begin a process of seeing what's there in the landscape and which relationship you want to tune into.
Oh, I love the sound of this. So this is, where are you running this, and how can people get in contact?
I'm running it in West Sussex, near a place called Palborough. There's a birch woodland. It's a beautiful birch woodland. I do it regularly, and the group is always small and encouraging. And the idea of it is to basically increase our visionary abilities, and also to do it in a way that feels respectful. So we do it. We have a ceremony before we go out, a ceremony when we come back, and there are many tools also. Some people love elaborate ceremonies. Others are more minimalist. So you cater for both. For both. I tend to love the elaborate kind, but there's some that likes just to one little candle to be lit and sit in. That's fine too. So we adapt to the psychology of the participants, but the main thing is to sit and to awaken that soul in you that has that dreaming quality to it.
I can attest to that it works. But I've never done an overnight kind of vigil like this, and I really like the sound of that. So where can people contact you?
Obviously for future things and work, I have my socials are quite active. I'm relatively active on both Facebook and Instagram, but my main website is kornevall.com, KORNEVALL.com, and I work a lot with courses. I have a Substack called the Northern Spirit House, which I share with a colleague over in California, and we work a lot with. We are going to set off now in September to work a lot with the practical aspect of working with, say, nature spirits and things, what we can do as rituals, what they look like, and then we have big conversations around that. So we run courses and we do all sorts of activities, and it's going well. There's a lot of interest at the moment for this, and I'm so kind of blessed to be able to do something I love and to share that with people. Yeah, it's great.
That's wonderful. Is some of that online then, or is it all in person?
No. Some of this will be online on the Substack. We have lots of things there. We've got podcasts there. We've got all kinds of things happening there. But I also have, for those who want to do a mentorship with me or work with me close as one-to-one, I offer that for a small number of people. Mm-hmm. Those are the ones who want to dwell into Norse mythology in particular, mm-hmm. and that landscape, the 9 worlds, the tree of life. The kind of spiritual perception the soul perceptions that comes from the North. So the idea of the multi-soul and all of those things. So I teach that. I do 6 months mentorship, 9 months mentorships. And I feel like we're slightly in the trenches in mental health at the moment. There's a lot of trouble out there. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot of people who come with questions and who sometimes need to feel that they can, that so many times they need to have their voice needs to be heard, not just in the waking life, mm-hmm. but also in the visionary dream life. And that's something I'm working with at the moment.
That's much needed.
It's much needed. Yeah. That they don't feel like they've been cut off from their inheritance, their spiritual heritage that's so deep and profound. Yes, there are only fragments of it in Scandinavia and in England, that deep wisdom tradition, but it's still there, and it's just a matter of lifting a couple of lids, really, opening some portals, so to speak.
No, it's great. It's great work, and I'm really enjoying Waking the Dragons as well. I'm loving that, and I'm loving the kind of the little dips into what the old words meant. Some of our words that we use now and where they come from too, as well as the myths and the practical exercises, the practical suggestions for ceremony, which are very helpful. So I recommend that too. Well, thank you so much for making the time to speak to me. This has been absolutely wonderful. I would love to come along to one of your overnight, visualization. That would be really great. Yes. So, keep in touch, and thanks again. Have a great time.